show, folks. I'm your host, Mark Puckett. On today's program, we're going to be talking about the relationship between shutter speed, ISO, and aperture. Now, most of the time, this is probably the hardest concept for new photographers to grasp. Now, they all sort of work together in what's called the photographic triangle. Now, that photographic triangle, like I said, has those three components, and they all work together in creating the perfect exposure for your image. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of discuss a few of the techniques and topics and give you a few examples and try and help you understand exactly how those things work together and the types of results that you're going to get as you fiddle with each one. Because if you adjust one, you're going to have to adjust the other in order to get the desired effect. So I'm going to give you a few examples, walk you through a little bit, and hopefully all that mumbo jumbo will translate into some decent images. So let's get cracking.
So we've got three different parts. First we have aperture and shutter speed, and ISO. This is a graphic representation of the exposure triangle. You have ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. The more ISO you introduce into your image, the more noise, digital noise that you get. The lower the aperture value, the lower the depth of field, and shutter speed controls motion blur. Now in this chart we have a graphic representation of what each of the components to a proper exposure actually do. Aperture controls the size of the opening to the lens to the camera. The shutter speed controls the amount of time the sensor is allowed to capture light, and ISO controls the sensitivity of the camera's sensor to the light. So with our first component we have aperture. Aperture essentially controls the amount of light that gets from the lens to the sensor inside the camera. Now, contrary to what most people think when they first start off, the lower the number of your f-stop, the bigger the hole, as you can see here. If you have an f-stop of 1.4, it's bigger than an f-stop of 2. If you have an f-stop of 2, it's bigger than 2.8, and so on. So, as you can see, the wider your aperture, the less light you're going to have in order to take a great picture. So very low light conditions are really no problem at all. And it sometimes even eliminates the need for flash or secondary lighting. On another note of awesomeness, this also enables you to not have to introduce so much ISO into your shots, which in turn will result in a better overall image with less graininess and less digital noise. But we'll get to ISO and explain all of it here in just a bit. The second component we have is shutter speed. Shutter speed basically controls the amount of time that the sensor is allowed to capture light. So you have your aperture, it allows it determines how much light gets into the camera. Shutter speed controls how long the sensor gets to have an exposure to that light. So it's sort of like the shutters on a window. Now, this graphic is a perfect example of how shutter speed works. If you have an extremely high shutter speed, say 1/250th of a second, you're going to freeze the action. Whatever's happening in the camera, it's just going to stop. When you get down to a medium exposure of about 1/250th of a second, you're going to begin to experience some blur because it wasn't fast enough to just stop it. And then when you get down to 1/15th of a second, of course you can see that it completely blurs, but it does not freeze that action quite like an extremely fast shutter speed does.
So the last component we have is ISO. Now ISO, or ASA as it was previously called, kind of harkens back to the old school days where we used film. We use ISO now on most digital DSLRs and other types of cameras. Even point and shoots are now using adjustable ISO to change and alter exposure. ISO is usually the last thing that I will mess with. If I can't get the image I want, then I will adjust ISO, because the lower the ISO setting, which on most DSLRs now is 100, and the lower the setting, the less noise or digital grain you're going to have in those images.
So just by taking a look at this chart, if you increase your ISO, you're going to get brighter images, but you're also going to get more digital noise. if you have a lower ISO, you're going to have darker images and less digital noise. So I don't want any noise in my shot, so that's usually the last thing that I'm going to tool around with. If I can get a great shot based on the parameters of aperture and shutter speed, that's what I would rather do. If I absolutely positively cannot get the shot that I need adjusting aperture or shutter speed, then and only then will I adjust ISO to make the sensor inside my camera a little bit more sensitive to the light that's coming in, so that I can go ahead and get a decent exposure and minimal noise. So I'll increase it incrementally and hopefully not introduce too much into that image. So now it's time for a little test. So the test I set up, continuous lighting. I'm going to start off at a 50 shutter speed and 3.5 aperture with an ISO of 100. And this was the image I came up with. As you can see, it's very dark, but there's no graininess in any of the darker areas. The second shot I did, I kept the exact same shutter and aperture, 50 and 3.5, but I increased my ISO all the way up to 1600. And this was the image I came up with here. As you can see, it's much more well exposed, but if you look in the darker areas, there is plenty of digital noise and grain in those darker areas. For the second test, I decided to increase my shutter speed and my aperture, but I wanted to leave the ISO the exact same. So I'm using a flash. I'm at 250 with an f-stop of f8, and I'm leaving the ISO exactly the same. As you can see, in the image, it is a little underexposed, but there is no digital grain in the darker areas whatsoever. It's a very nice, solid, flat, dark black. There's no noisiness in those darker areas. It's an overall great looking image, except for the fact that it's a little underexposed. So for part 2 of test 2, what I did is, since the power on the flash was going to stay the same, I just decreased my f-stop. So I've got an f-stop of 3.5 and my ISO is going to stay the same, so I do not introduce any grain into this image. And as you can see, a perfectly well exposed image, and all the blacks are perfectly black. There are no digital noise artifacts in any of the darker areas. You know, it's an overall great looking image, now perfectly exposed without any grossness in those shadowy areas.
Motion Slider 36 is a relatively cheap alternative to the more expensive models currently on the market. Now, if you're looking for smooth linear motion for not a lot of cash, this heavy-duty bad boy is for you. Now, the Motion Slider 36 is an inexpensive slider built from all aluminum construction and uses linear bearings for a smooth glide. Now, while it doesn't have any mechanical gears to provide motion, it is still a contender for those that are on a budget. It can be used on any flat surface or mounted to a tripod base or head via the 1/4 inch or the 3/8 inch holes on the bottom of the rail. Cameras can be mounted directly to the top plate via 1/4 inch or 3/8 inch holes, and it also includes a 1/4 inch mounting screw so that you can attach your own fluid head. And if you do attach a fluid head, it will allow you to add a variety of different shots to all of your productions. Weighing in at only 8 pounds, you can pack this mofo with you to add production value to wedding gigs, product demos, and any other video project where you want to add a bit of motion. Coming in at only $160, this is a great way to add a new level of pizzazz. And I do know that there are a few other companies that make sliders as well, but none of them have sent me any to review yet. But as soon as they do, I'll be sure to compare them and give you my thoughts on how they stack up. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Be sure to check us out on the Twitterverse and find us on Facebook. We don't have many friends on Facebook yet, but we would love to have you over there. So find us on Twitter, go there, and also find us on Facebook. Just do a search. We don't have a page name yet, but it's coming. I also want to remind everyone that on the next episode, we are going to be discussing the all-new Final Cut Pro 10, recently released by Apple, and the amazingly blown out of proportion debacle that is post-production right now in the Apple world. So find us, check us, subscribe, and if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please don't forget to send those in as well. So thanks again for joining us, guys. We'll see you again next time. Take it easy.